Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the video presentation of my master thesis. The topic of my master thesis is perceptions, attitudes, and consequences of social workers in the field of language brokering. Language brokering is performed by language brokers, and a language broker is a child who works as a non-official interpreter. A more specific definition has been established by Antonini in 2015 and came with the term child language broker. And this has the following definition. A child language broker is a child who interprets and translates for their parents and also the social worker for whom they interpret, and they bridge languages and cultures together. They are basically mediators who bring two different parties of two different languages and cultures together. In the context of language brokering, there are three parties present. You have the language broker, who does the interpreting. You have the parent, for whom the child interprets. And you also have the social worker, who tries to help the parent out. But why does language brokering happen in the first place? The main reason is migration. Migration is a timeless phenomenon. It has always happened throughout history, and even as of right now, there are many people who migrate from one place to another. Many people live in another state or country and therefore need public services to integrate in another society. However, sometimes public services do not have interpreters ready, and therefore they need a family member who is able to translate for them. Many people often bring a child to different conversations since children adapt faster to a new culture and a new language. I decided to research this topic because generally there is a lack of previous research. Research has taken place since the early 1990s, but language brokering itself has rarely been a focal point, and mostly the perceptions of children were viewed and the parents as well, but never the views or attitudes of the social workers who had to document files for parents. For this thesis, I came up with four research questions, those being how do Flemish social workers experience the usage of language brokers, which benefits and or drawbacks do they experience, and what are the attitudes and beliefs of Flemish social workers regarding the use of language brokers in professional settings, and lastly, how do Flemish social workers adapt their method of working when interacting with language brokers. Currently, I have delved into some literature, and as I said previously, there is a lack of research of social workers, but there have been some findings about children. For instance, Secoli in 2019 has done some research on the attitudes and emotions of children in Italy who worked as language brokers. I decided to take Italy as a landscape since it is comparable to Belgium. Generally, Secoli found that children have positive emotions towards language brokering. They often felt proud, responsible, and happy that they could help their parents out. However, they also felt a bit doubtful. The children were uncertain if they could do this on a long-term basis and if it is sustainable for them or the parents to work as a non-official interpreter. In the Belgium landscape, some research has taken place as well. This has been performed by De Keyser and Stevens. They have looked at Moroccan children's proficiency, but unfortunately the attitudes of those children were not taken into account. For my own research, I will use a theoretical framework. More specifically, I will use the ABC model, which has been established by the American psychologist Ellis back in 2001. This framework is used to treat bad emotions and also forms the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy and relative emotional behavioral therapy. It can, however, be used for positive emotions as well, so this will be a rather inductive method towards emotional analysis. I will now briefly explain how the model works. So when an event happens and it can cause emotions, this is called the activating event. This is the A part of the model. This event causes emotions or beliefs, which is the B part of the model, and those beliefs can be either rational or irrational and both positive and negative, and those beliefs can cause someone to take action towards something, which can in turn lead to consequences. To illustrate, I will give an example of the ABC model in language brokering. Let's say that a social worker has to work with a language broker. This is the activating event of the model. The social worker might believe that the child is unable to translate certain aspects, concepts, or terminology, and therefore can have a negative belief towards child language brokers. The social worker would then take action and try to prevent using language brokers as much as possible, or prefer to use an interpreter, which is one of the possible consequences when using a language broker. So currently I am still looking for participants in my master thesis due to some unforeseen difficulties. I came into contact with participants, but then I didn't receive any response via email. However, I have found my first participant who works at the CAW, or the Center for General Welfare Work. Since currently I couldn't conduct any interviews, I have done some other preparations in advance. I already made the informed consent so that participants can give their explicit consent when taking part in the study, and I also advanced a bit on my literature review, which I explained previously. So my current hypothesis for the research are the following. I will base myself on the children's views since it can be fairly similar. Generally, I believe that social workers will have a bit of a positive view and even be relieved that some children are willing to help them out when there are no other candidates present for the parents. There, I do believe that there are, however, some doubts and obstacles and perhaps some negative attitudes. I think that the social workers might be doubtful about certain terminology or complex concepts which certain children might not fully comprehend. I also believe that this can lead to consequences, that is to say, that they might adapt their working methods or strategies when working with children. To conclude, there currently hasn't been performed much previous research on language brokering, especially not from the perspective of social workers. I believe that this can be an interesting case into the landscape of language brokering in Belgium. If I have to base myself on the views of children, there can be both positive and negative aspects present in the act of language brokering, and I do believe that some social workers might have to adapt some changes in their practice when a child is working as an interpreter for them. And lastly, here I have the bibliography, which cites all the sources that I have used during this presentation. Thank you for your attention.